2020 at 7 p.m. Joint meeting of the Board of Selectmen, School Committee, and Finance Committee. Just a quick notice to everybody who's listening, either online or on at home on TV. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, General Law, Section 30A, Chapter 30A, Section 18, and the Governor's March 15, 2020 order imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place. This meeting of the Town of Chelmsford Board of Selectmen, School Committee, and Finance Committee will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information and the general guidelines for remote participation by the members of the public and all parties with the right and or requirement to attend this meeting. Members of the public who wish to watch the meeting may do so by accessing Chelmsford Telemedia website at www.chelmsfordtv.org. They also can go to Comcast Channel 99 or Verizon Channel 37 on their cable box. No in-person attendance for members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. In the event that we are unable to do so, despite best efforts, we will post on the town's website an audio, video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting. So with that, I will share here the agenda. Just bear with me 1 second. And can everybody see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So open session and public comments. Is there anybody that has any comments from the public? Seeing none, hearing none, and I don't see any in the chat box. That's before I get too far into this, just a reminder that what gets typed in the chat box is being recorded. It's not only recording what you're chatting in the general chat box, it's also recording what you privately chat to somebody else. So just be aware that any comments you make are public knowledge and will be posted. All right, so with that, I will turn the meeting over to the town moderator, John Curlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a number of discussions with Chelmsford Telemedia, Pete and Dan. Paul Cohen and I have had a number of discussions, and virtual meeting is not really going to work well. I mean, you see the problems of having it with just a handful of people. Can you imagine having 175? So we've talked about having it at the gym, the high school gym. There will be ample space for social distancing. We will provide wipes for people, and we're going to discourage people from touching the microphone stand, if possible. Paul and I also discussed the possibility of taking temperatures of anybody who wants it. I certainly would encourage people to have their temperature taken before going into the meeting. If anybody has a fever, they probably shouldn't attend. We would, I don't know how people feel about this. We want to try to get done in one night. Paul and I had spoken about the possibility of doing that. It would be healthier for everybody, and I don't know if people want us to meet at 7 o'clock as opposed to 7:30. I mean, by the end of June, a lot of people may be working again, and we may still have to do the 7:30 start. The process for me to announce it is that I'm speaking now with the Board of Selectmen. I'm conferring with you. I'm consulting with you. I will also give Sue Rosa a call, since I think she would be the most appropriate person to explain to the Attorney General's office why we are rescheduling our meeting. Obviously, it's a public health issue. And I would probably issue it on Tuesday because it has to be within 30 days of the meeting itself, which is June 22nd. So unless people have questions about having it in the high school gym or questions about why we're doing it there, I'd love to discuss it with anybody.
I like the idea, John.
Thank you.
When I heard that idea, I thought that was actually the best idea I'd heard as far as being able to socially distance. And a lot of people, when we talked about the auditorium, I thought getting in and out of the aisles, out of the seating rows was going to be difficult, but this made a lot of sense when I heard it.
I know that the North Andover, I think, is having theirs on the football field. But number one, ours is an evening meeting, so by then mosquitoes might be out, or it may rain, which would dampen the meeting in every conceivable way. So the gym really seems to be the best place to do it.
So John, are you looking for a vote on this, or just?
No, I don't need a vote. I mean, it's my discretion, but obviously if members of the Board of Selectmen or really anyone who's at this meeting has an objection. Otherwise, I'll issue a declaration on Tuesday, basically rescheduling it to the same date and time, but at the high school gym as opposed to the senior center.
I have no problem.
So John, so that would meet all the legal requirements, like you don't have to go to the senior center and call it to order and then adjourn it to the different location?
Right. Because of COVID-19, they've changed some of the regulations that allow me to do it this way, as long as I do it within 30 days. The problem was that if I had done it this way initially, as opposed to going there, I can only continue the meeting for 30 days, and our original date was in late April. So I would have had to do it again for late May, and the 30-day period would end up on Memorial Day. So obviously that wouldn't have worked. So this really works out the best, and as long as I do the proclamation, the declaration, and we will publicize it on social media, and I'm assuming that all the town meeting reps will get an email to that effect, and it'll probably be posted so that on the town website, and probably, I don't know, is town hall going to be open by then? I don't know. So that's the best we can do. I don't expect a great turnout, but I really expect that we should be able to get a quorum.
Should you, how the Boy Scouts always provide refreshments? I would assume that you're not going to do that. You could maybe caution people to bring their own water and things like that.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm assuming that it's basically going to be individual chairs that are just 6 feet apart from each other.
Right.
So it's not like you're going to be, if you bring your meal, you're probably going to have to eat it from your lap.
I just meant like water and a drink because, it could get hot in June in the gym.
That's fine. That's fine.
Kathy, you're suggesting just giving people a heads up to bring their own when he issues the notice?
Yes, that's all.
We'll make sure that's done.
Kathy, you're suggesting just giving people a heads up to bring their own when he issues?
I'm sorry, I can't hear.
That was someone's TV. It was a delayed, my comment.
Okay. Well, if that satisfies everybody, that's great, and I'll get right on it. Okay, thank you very much.
All right, with that, any other comments or questions for John? Not seeing any, and the chat box is clear. I'll move on to the next item. Darlene, Lucia, the town accountant, is going to go through the status report and projections. And if you want, Darlene, if you give me 1 second, I can get the status reports up. Bear with me 1 second, I'm getting a delay.
We've got a note from Chelmsford Telemedia. Could somebody, whoever has their TV on, please either shut it off or get out of earshot of it?
Just bear with me 1 second, the document's opening. I don't know why it's taking so long here. All right. Now everybody can see that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Is that where you want me, darling? Oh, hold on. I got to unmute you. Darling, did you unmute? There you go.
I think, can you hear me?
Yes, you're good.
Yeah. Good evening, everybody. Yes, let me give you the status of where we are in fiscal year 2020. Let me first start off with the revenues. So far, the revenue budgets actually remain pretty solid. We were doing well up until, COVID hit in probably early March, mid-March. So we got through, pretty much all 3 quarters of the fiscal year. So it'll be this fourth quarter revenue that we'll have to really look at. But I'd like to just start just saying that we are 92% of our $139 million budget total. So we're right on the benchmark percentage where we should be this time of year. So I'm happy to see that. But I'm just a little bit cautious of what we will see on fourth quarter collections. I'm thinking that we will see some decline on some of those line items. The first one of our biggest on local receipts is motor vehicle excise. We've actually collected 94% of the $5.4 million that we budgeted. So we're doing well there. But April, we did have a commitment that came in April that was for $484,000, and we had a small one in May for $132,000 that was issued. Those will be due before the end of the fiscal year, so we should be able to collect those. They're actually due in May, so they're not reflected in the report that I have. So there will be additional revenue. So I think we'll hit that revenue number for motor vehicle. What I am a little bit, we are starting to see the downturn, though, I think, on motor vehicles. But almost every year, our commitments have been more than the prior year. This year, we're down a little bit. So our total commitments have decreased for about $187,000 from the prior year, which is a 1.5% decrease. And I'm predicting, because of the pandemic, people aren't in the unemployment rate, people aren't going to be worrying about buying new vehicles. So we're really worried about what will motor vehicle excise look like in fiscal 21 and the ripple effect into 22. So we'll be looking at that, and probably in future budgets, we'll probably have to reduce down that revenue number. On the local options and the meal tax revenues, we're averaging about $185,000 a quarter. We've seen strong collections in that. Meals are actually up 15% from prior year. That was right before the whole COVID-19 pandemic hit. So I think on the fourth quarter, we're going to see a decrease. We'll have to see, but we still have a strong number there, so I'm glad to see that number. I know that a lot of the restaurants are doing takeouts and stuff, so we'll still see revenue from there. But I think it'll be much smaller because people there's no, like alcohol and all of that, and people are just doing small takeouts. You're not bringing in 6 people for dinner, things like that. Hotel occupancy, we're averaging about $130K a quarter. This is much lower than the quarters of last year. Similar to the meal tax on the fourth quarter, I think we're going to see minimum. Hotels are shut down, so we're really not going to see any revenue there on the hotels.
Darlene, what was it typically in previous quarters?
And if I actually have that information, one moment.
I'm just looking for like a ballpark.
Yeah.
Quarter range.
Hold on 1 second. I actually have a breakout of chart that. Yes, here it is. So on rooms and meals, I just want to give you a little where we're at. So in the third quarter of fiscal 19, we were at we brought in 160K. This year, fiscal 20, it's only $100,000. So there's a $60,000 decline there. Same thing in all quarters. I can kind of run them down, and then the end of December in fiscal 19, we're 161K. We brought in 145 in fiscal 20. So we're definitely seeing a decline in the hotels and in that. And I mean, it's up. It's a little skewed. It's up from 18, but 18 is when most we had the Radisson shut down completely in that fiscal year, and then we brought it back online in 19. But now in 20, we're still seeing a decline. So it's.
Thank you.
We'll have to see what I can actually send you a chart on that too. On all the years of our hotel tax and meals tax. Fee permitting. Fees are up actually 12%. We're about 150K from prior year. We've had some large projects around town that as you drive around town, you do see that from a year ago. My concern is that permitting, we don't have a lot of large projects on the horizon. So I'm thinking we'll probably be level revenue funded on the permitting, or we'll see a small decline. I did talk to the inspector. He says that people are spending money on their homes right now. Their homes, so they're doing some work, and they're doing small projects, so they have to post maybe some smaller permits. But I think that we're not going to see the increase in revenue fees for permitting that we've seen in the past years. I think we're probably going to end up going flat on that. Other licensing. That was a big number that jumped up because it was a 47% increase from prior year. The big where that fell was mostly in the Board of Health licensing. They've been more restaurants have opened, and that they are just issuing more Board of Health licensing than they have in prior years. I think Sue has reported on this before. They've also increased their fee structure. So their fee structure is bringing in a little bit more revenue than it was before. So that's really the increase there from prior year. But fees actually decreased about 50%. This is actually due to the fire department no longer those fire boxes that you used to see on telephone poles. They used to pay a fee for those fire boxes. They've all now changed over to fiber lines. So those fire boxes, there's no permitting money coming in under those. So what we'll do in the next fiscal year is we'll actually look at the fee lines, and in that particular one for fire, we'll reduce down their budget for revenue for that line item. Property tax is remaining solid there. I have no concerns about that. We're at about we're at 92.5% collected. Even though these last quarter tax bills they're due in June, we should see most of the revenue be recognized in the fiscal year 20. So I'm really not concerned about property tax collection there at all.
Darlene, are we concerned about future tax revenue?
Yeah, well, yes. I mean, I think what's going to happen, we have so many people on unemployment. Will people be able to pay their taxes? Will they be able to, will we see more people go into tax title? Will we have more people foregoing their taxes? And, John can probably, Susan can probably speak better to this, because I think if we probably can go back and look at what happened in 08 and some of the trends in 08 when we had mid-year cuts and people were hurting, what did our tax title, did our tax titles increase that fiscal year? Because I think we're going to see a decline in that, because people are just, really, really hurting at this point. I mean, the numbers I saw today for unemployment were staggering. So, but I think what I wanted to talk about revenues in general for fiscal for 20, we're holding our own on those. We will end the year in the black. I'm not predicting, and I know I never like to throw out a number, but I don't think we're going to have that $1 million free cash. But I think I did look back in 08 and we had a positive free cash number. It just may be $600,000 or $500,000, but at least we will still end the year in the black. Let me just talk a little bit about expenditures. The general funding budget, we're 87 expense through April. So everyone, I think, is doing fairly well with their expenditure costs. We did, of course, have a mild winter. So we do have a surplus left over in our snow and ice, which is about $688,000. But on the flip side of that, we are now watching closely our benefit costs. We've had more unemployment claims come in. We've had some IOD claims, out on injury claims, higher than in prior years, and workman comp claims. So we're now we've got like a plus on one side, but we may have negatives on the other. So I'm watching those numbers closely through June 30th to see what we do. We do have to have some budget adjustments made at the Springtown meeting. And that's one of the things I just want to go through quickly, just tell you kind of what those adjustments are, what the departments are looking for. We have municipal, under the municipal administration expense, it's actually IT department. What we did starting in fiscal 20, so it's kind of our first year, we decided to consolidate all the telephones and push it to IT. Instead of the individual departments having their own little telephone line, we decided to push the telephone one line, and a lot of towns are doing this. They're pushing their utilities to one department to manage it. And we did that with IT. We really, so it was kind of a guesstimate of what it was going to cost. And what we also kind of pushed out to IT was anybody that's going to be purchasing new software, that may need a new software program and a new permitting program, they would be actually managing all of those costs instead of the individual departments. So when that kind of all fell out, we were about 20,000 short with the IT between software being purchased and the telephones. So we're asking for a $20,000 increase to their expenditure line. Public safety reached out to me, Chief Spinney reached out to me, and Chief Ryan about what they need for their departments. Chief Spinney has new recruiting officers that came in, and what comes with that is recruiting costs. We have to get them all, they're pre-medical, they have to be fitted with everything. So there's a cost when you hire new officers. So there was $65,000 for the recruitment cost. There was $8,000 for pre-medical. So he's asking for that. He needs some gas tank repair over the station that's already been done. That cost him $3,000. These were kind of unexpected costs that came up. That he had to purchase a new evidence tracking software. He had some additional equipment. And then Gary Ryan had a truck that went down that had to be repaired. We have a fire truck that had to be fixed, and it cost him $90,000. So in total, the public safety is looking for $180,000 for that. Public facilities is looking for some personnel costs. What happened there is they went from that personnel cost is actually in longevity that they've got to do some payouts to, and it was just based on going from 37.5 hours to a 40-hour work week. And then under their expenditures, Kathleen Caribbean had some unexpected expenditures that came up. The high school heat exchange, we had to do an elevator upgrade at the fire department, the kitchen and gym painting at the biome. South Row needed some steam traps. We had some HVAC issues all over town. And then the elevator was in dire repair over at the town offices. So she's looking for $140,000 there. Solid waste is going to need an extra $30,000, and this is just for actually extra waste. As you expect, people are home and people are putting more trash out, and those bills have been coming in much higher than we've seen in prior months. Parks needs just a small little $4,000. Again, they went from the 37.5-hour work week to a 40-hour work week. We had the new offices down in the basement downstairs at the town offices where Steve Servin and those people in emergency management are. So there was Gary and Kathleen Caribbean had to build out some office space down there. And then again, I was just talking about our benefit costs. We're seeing an increase under the unemployment and workman's comp. And I know those numbers are high, but those are actual costs. That's what we're seeing. Our unemployment claims are coming in extremely high, and our workman's comp was much higher than we expected. Any questions there? What I did do is as I do a couple of times a year.
Can I ask? I'm sorry to interrupt you. Can I ask a quick question about the 6 new officers? Did 6 people retire, or what is 6 new officers under public safety? Recruit 6 new officers.
We did have people that did retire. These retirees were in the academy though a year ago. So it's while they're in the academy, and then when they come on. We did have some retirees. These are not like, they weren't anything that was new. They were people that Chief Spinney knew he was going to be bringing on. So it's not that we have additionally 6 new officers in the academy. He had over the course of a couple of years had some retirees. These are just people filling those. People were then promoted, and he just bringing those officers in. But they weren't anything. He doesn't have any more officers than he normally has. Okay. And at this point, just to let you know, he actually has like 2 more officers in the academy, which he's not sure with what's going to happen budget-wise, if that will even come into play, if they'll even have those people. Same thing with fire department. Fire department actually, it was looking for 4 hires. 2 are in the academy, 2 are going to be new, and they may not take those hires in going forward into the next fiscal year. So I just like to run through with you on the special revenue funds. It's always nice to see these balances. I know they don't affect the general fund, but just to kind of let you know what's going on. The first one is the COA lunch program, and you'll see that it's actually in a deficit of $15,000. What's happening is we're still, during this COVID, we're still feeding, we're still doing Meals on Wheels, we're still doing things like that. This money will be able to be put through on either through a FEMA grant, which I've received, or through the other grants that have been coming through for the state. So we'll be able to recoup these costs the same as the school lunch we're feeding. The school is actually feeding students and families. Those are going to be able to either through the CARES Act or through FEMA for reimbursement. So I don't want to be anybody be alarmed when they see that there's a negative balance there. School lunch does have a significant balance of $622,000. They were spending some of their own money on some kitchen repairs, and they're going to be taking some of this money with feeding some of the children that they have right now under during the COVID. The next one is just revolving funds, and there's just a list of things that are revolving funds, like sailors' weight on measures and dog revolving, and all of the school accounts. I know one of the ones that people always watch and kind of see is still the child care account. The current balance in there is $1.8 million. It just seems to they use some money and then they get some money. I think we'll see a decrease in that because they're not open, so they're not doing any child care. They're not doing anything there, so they probably will see some decrease in revenues during that. That's just, of course, the big one there. People see it and they kind of go, "Ooh, circuit breaker." It says $5 million. The way that we account is we don't actually draw on that account during the course of the year. They will spend everything out of their general fund sped account, and then in June, I will get a memo from the business manager at the school department asking me to transfer those sped costs over to the revolving account, and that will draw down on that $5 million. The other one's just reserved for appropriations.
Darlene, have you advanced the slide? Are you still on?
I think Ken is. Ken, can you just advance to
So you're on 13?
Yes, I'm on. Yep.
Thank you.
Actually on 12, if you want to just.
Oh.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Yep. So that's not my slide. Okay, I'm sorry. 13. I think you can move it all the way up. And yeah, that's the revolving account. So you'll see there's some. I don't know if you can blow it up or. So what will happen with that $5 million is they'll probably charge about $3 million worth of sped costs to that line item in June. So that'll bring that cost down. The next slide, if you just go forward, is just the reserve for appropriations. These basically where the sewer betterments sit. This is where the capacity impact fee, sewer betterments, capital improvement fee. These are the things that you see that we voted town meeting, that we move this money over to cover costs in the sewer department. So these are just kind of reserve appropriations. Anything in these line items, what they mean when they say a reserve for appropriation, they have to be reserved and appropriated at town meeting. So those are the things you see under warrant articles. And then the last two slides are just basically donation accounts. Those are like the skateboard and the bike path and open space and planning board stuff and police donations, just kind of general donation accounts that people donate and then can be used for certain purposes. So there's just, of course, I'm not going to really pick on any one of the balances, just to give you an idea of what's in those accounts. And just so that's just the end of my presentation, but I just want to say that I think, again, I think we'll do well ending this year for fiscal 20. It's where my concern will be is going into 21. I'm glad that John wants to have a town meeting because I'm really hoping to have a balanced budget starting July 1st. And I had a conversation with the auditors if this didn't happen and we would have to do, the 112. I'd have to do a 112 budget and make sure that every month that we're only expending the 112. It's just a tedious process. It would be nice to just be able to go in the start of the fiscal year with a balanced budget. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Darlene. So I'll jump back to the agenda here. So up next, we have the revised revenue estimates for the fiscal 2021 operating budget.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good evening, everybody. We're at the Memorial Day holiday, and normally by now, the legislature would be completed its budget, state budget, in terms of enacted by the House, enacted by the Senate, and then they'd be heading to a conference committee next month with the hope of getting a new budget in place for the new state fiscal year, and sometimes it would drift into July. Well, obviously, where we're extraordinary circumstances that nobody has experienced in our lifetime, that things are quite different. The state budget situation is uncertain. There's no guidance from the state in terms of where we're at. There's no timetable to adopt the state budget. The feeling is that the state will likely go with temporary budgets. There's no indication of any outside relief from Washington that would flow through the states to assist cities and towns. But one thing we do know is that the landscape has changed. And I think the prudent course of action at this point in time is to recognize the realities of today and to move forward. Clearly, the economic impact of the coronavirus is going to affect us not only for the upcoming fiscal year, but at least the year beyond. And the impacts of the state of emergency is still not known. For example, there's this phased plan for reopening, which targets have to be met, and if they aren't met, they'll be delayed. And if the conditions get worse, as we all know, then they may go back steps. And there's also this concern that there may be a resurgence of the coronavirus in the fall when climate changes become effective with the changed seasons into the winter, which could result in another shutdown. So, clearly there's a lot of uncertainty. You may have read this week the groups that provided forecasts to the state legislature 4+ weeks ago are coming up with revised forecasts that are even more severe than the ones they issued because of the changing and uncertain nature where things are happening. And obviously at the local level, and this sort of was a comment that was made earlier, our sources of property tax and fee revenues are dependent obviously upon the strength of the economy. For example, the question came about property tax. Well, the issue of new construction is a major one. That's our largest property tax source. Over 3/4 of the town's budget comes from the property tax. And how it works for new construction is your revenue for the subsequent fiscal year depends upon what the growth was in the prior fiscal year. So that's why, and I'll get into it pretty soon, we're pretty good for property tax in fiscal 21 in terms of the new growth figure. That's because most of that occurred prior to the COVID-19 impact in this fiscal year. But now when you've got the property tax growth starting this July, obviously it's going to be significantly less just because the nature of construction is less. And also, if you think about it, even aside from the impact of the coronavirus on the property tax, we were sort of coming off of an unprecedented high of construction projects. We had seen the ones on Turnpike Road with all those apartments and the new apartments in the center behind Brick House and so forth. And yes, there's still a few out there, the ones on Littleton Road, at Hunt Road, and the ones on Gorham Street at the town line. But clearly the magnitude is less. And unfortunately, some of the growth that we're forecasting to take place, such as the reconstruction of the Glenview, that's not moving forward at this point either. So again, that's an impact. Why we say this isn't just a problem for 21, it's for the years ahead. Similarly, motor vehicle sales, and we'll get into that. Obviously, if people are driving less and staying at home, the impact in terms of need for replacement of vehicles, and the fact that a lot of vehicle purchases are discretionary, and that people often just buy vehicles because they want a newer vehicle. Well, again, if the economic conditions are tighter, then the volume of that activity will diminish. And obviously, as Darlene mentioned earlier, if hotels are now closed, and even if they do open to a limited capacity, and just the hesitation of people coming into restaurants because of the concerns of the spread of the virus are going to result in lower taxes. And again, the hotel taxes the hotels being closed. And if you recall, the Radisson was closed for construction prior to this as well. And thus far, they haven't commenced construction, but they're talking about rebranding the hotel in a major construction project. So that's going to diminish hotel taxes in 21 at least. And then, again, the other thing to recognize is this is different than the 2008 recession. It is noted. We don't know how long and if these operations are going to take place. So it really is unprecedented for what any of us have ever seen, and that's why you see the forecast being so uncertain. I think the key thing is we don't know what's ahead of us, but if we don't act now, there'll be a more severe impact if we come back in the fall and try to adjust, and for two reasons. One is that assumes that the conditions allow us to come back in the fall, because if there is a resurgence of the virus, then that may preclude a fall town meeting. But second, if you do come back in the fall, you have a smaller window to balance the budget to bring into compliance. Right now, we can do it over a 12-month period. If you wait till October, well, now you're talking an 8-month period. And that's the reason, again, to act at this time. So if we go to the next slide. So again, we worked with Darlene Lucy, our town accountant, John Souza, our finance director, and Michael McCall, the assistant town manager. We gathered, and then at the end, we touched base with Dr. Lang on the school side. And I just want to share with you the perspective that we have. And I guess my caution is, as we go in this, is let's not get lost in the weeds, because there may be individual estimates that we could spend a lot of time debating what they are. But I think the big thing is to get the big picture and see, an order of magnitude of where we need to go. So again, first one is property tax revenue. For 21, we're decreasing it slightly for two reasons. One is we lost a little bit on the new growth that would go to June 30th. So we decreased the new growth down by $100,000. Also, the assessors and their contractors are having a difficult time capturing new growth, because you can't go out and do inspections in people's homes, because of the virus concern. So there may be growth that's sort of out there that we can't capture because we really don't want to be going into people's homes. So unlike when you see a new apartment building being constructed, that's easy to do, but the individual residential property. So again, we forecast $100,000 decrease there. If we go to, and again, as I noted at the bottom, the new growth would be a greater concern in 22. If we go to the next slide about state aid, on page 19, this is where we see a significant change. And again, we're forecasting a 20% decline in state aid. Again, if you go back to the 2008 recession, we lost about 16%, but the 2008 recession didn't have everything shut down, and with the uncertainty of what was going to come afterwards. And again, in these numbers, you can debate whether, well, would it be 20% across the board for Chapter 70 and unrestricted general government aid? Probably it won't be. My guess is that they'll probably cut less Chapter 70 and more unrestricted general government aid. But for the purposes of this argument and for projection moving forward, we applied a 20% decrease. And as you can see, John Souza assembled all these numbers across the categories, and then we debated them and refined them. And as you can see, we're projecting a $3.7 million loss of state aid at this point in time from what was our original projection for 21, and it's roughly $3.4 million from the current year's budget. Again, the major categories are Chapter 70 school aid and the unrestricted general government aid, which is more previously known as lottery aid and additional assistance. And again, why I think the lottery and the unrestricted general aid would be greater is, again, you have a major loss to lottery sales, and the legislature still has not enacted online lottery sales. And so again, we're seeing an impact there. If you then go to the next slide in terms of...
Paul,
yes.
excuse me, could I just ask a question on the previous slide? In the past, when we faced a recession,
yep,
do we continue to levy the 2.5% property tax increase, or do we look to take other challenges on the budget? So, I mean, the residents are going to need relief as much as the town. So how do we, have you given any thought to how we handle that? And are we just assuming it'll be a flat 2.5% increase, or are we looking at possible contingencies where maybe we don't raise it that much this year?
What I can tell you is back in the Great Recession, we taxed to the levy limit.
Okay.
The reason is because what happens is the impacts of the cuts become cuts in services. And as you'll see when we go further in the presentation, your major expenditures of the town that are discretionary are education, first and foremost. 2/3 of our departmental operations go into the schools. And that was always tied with property values as well as a core service of the community. And then your next largest ones are public safety and public works. And so the idea is to tax to the levy, because otherwise you're going to have impacts either on children and investment in their future, or you're going to have impacts on primarily public safety in terms of, fire station closings, fewer officers on the street. So even in the worst of times, we've gone to the levy limit. Most people's mortgages are particularly those who may be impacted, they're in escrow accounts, and they're assessed that monthly, and those escrow accounts don't adjust until annually. And so basically that's sort of how it plays out. So that's the answer to your question is yes. In the past, we've gone to the levy limit to prevent even further impacts onto the community. And what ends up happening is, and we talk about this, is, for every $1 million of cuts, you're saving $70 to the average single-family property tax bill. And so if you want to have a meaningful reduction in property tax, you're talking some significant cuts.
Mm-hmm.
And what you'll see tonight is in the presentation is we sort of lay out what is sort of the least painful amount of cuts. And then if you go beyond this, you're really getting into the meat and bones in terms of school operations and also in terms of public safety operations. And the reason for that is it's not that we sort of, throw out the most sensitive ones. It's because the other town operations are at minimal staffing levels. For example, the town accounting office cannot function with one less person. Mm-hmm. It just can't be done. In fact, it's been suggested that they have additional staffing when you look at how they're staffed compared to other towns of our size. And those same factors carry over when you go across the town in terms of the collections office, assessing, you've got one veterans agent and so forth. So, so it's really a case of you really are going to where the money is, and unfortunately that has impact on residents. So you're right, it's a tough thing, because what's going to happen here is the town's budget for next year is going to go down by I think $3 million beyond the budget compared to the budget we have now. But the problem is that people's property taxes are going to go up. Mm-hmm. So that's the dichotomy that you're stuck with, is you're cutting the budget, but yet the taxes are going up because of the fact that your non-property tax revenues are being so severely hit in terms of state aid or in terms of local receipts, meals, rooms, excise tax, and so forth.
Thank you.
All right, so if we go to slide 20, there's a minor category called available funds, and we identified an $83,000 reduction there into the stormwater enterprise fees. And as the note in the bottom shows, we are going to delay the that was to be the third and final phase in of the stormwater enterprise operations. And so because of that, you don't have the personnel benefit costs for those last group of employees that would bring the operation to the level. And that actually provides relief for businesses as well as, primarily because resident fee is $40. It would have gone to $60 with the third phase, but the business fee, as you may recall, is more variable because of it's based on the amount of paved surface area. So again, recognizing the impact of what's happening to businesses in the community, in discussions with the public works director and staff, it was deemed as, we believe that we'll have allowances from the DEP and EPA, given the circumstances that we're in, if we don't do that final phase in of the stormwater operation. So that's the change in available funds. And then the last one on page 21 is local receipts. And again, Darlene started referencing this earlier. We're forecasting a significant decline in motor vehicle excise. You can see an 11% decline to 4.9 million, which is $600,000. Meals tax, cutting it in half, which is a $330,000 decrease. Interest on late taxes, a minor change. Fees, as Darlene noted earlier, a 40% reduction in fees based upon the experience that we've seen this year. And then the other major one, the permits. We project a 20% decline in permits. Again, just because we just don't see the construction happening out there, particularly commercial construction across the community. So that's the major one. Investment interest, again, what's happening into interest rates. John Sousa feels that a $100,000 adjustment needs to take place there. Who knows what the Fed may do? They say they've got a lot of tools in the shelf, and one of those might be to reduce interest rates further, or have them go to negative interest rates, like they've done in Europe. And then the major one, obviously, is the hotel tax. We're cutting that by 3/4, a $400,000 hit. At this point, we have no idea when the state will allow hotels to open. And also, even if they do allow to open, are people going to be rushing to get into hotels? And as I mentioned earlier, the Radisson is expected to be closed for the entire year due to a planned renovation. And even if that were to be delayed and they were to reopen, again, it's a difficult spot. So as you can see at the bottom, it comes out to a 17.5% or 1.89 million, almost 1.9 million decrease over the projected budget that we presented in January, or 1.5 million or 14% from the current year's budget. And I'm going to ask John Sousa to, at this point, John wants to jump in and explain how the motor vehicle excise tax works and why we're foreseeing a major decline in what's a number that's really half of our local receipts. And John, if you're unmuted, can you come in?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Manager. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. What I'd like to do is just, if we could go to slide 22, just to give everyone in a nutshell of how motor vehicle excise tax works under state law. So, as many people know, it's based on a manufacturer suggested retail price that's established by the State Registry of Motor Vehicles. The town does not set the value of the vehicle. But the purpose of this slide is to show you that the town really earns the highest amount of tax revenue when a car is newer. So example, you see the depreciation schedule. If you were to purchase a 2020 vehicle this year, in 2020, it would be assessed at 90% of that MSRP value. Next year in 21, the value of the vehicle is going to go to 60%, and then finally next year to 40, and you can see it depreciates rapidly. And by year 5, it's only 10% of the initial manufacturer suggested retail price. So if you have an older car and you're a frugal person and you're able to keep that car running, as long as you own that vehicle, your bill is going to be down near the 10% level of it. And so just to put this in some perspective, each February we send out bills to everyone. It's called Commitment 1, and a commitment is just a collection of bills that the assessors provide to me as collector, and then my staff sends out the bills, and we work to collect that money. The large commitment comes in February, and it's everyone in town that owns some type of vehicle. So even if they don't buy a new car and they keep their same vehicle, typically that's a very large commitment. That accounts for roughly 80% of the taxes that we're going to collect in a given fiscal year. Where the town earns higher tax amount revenue throughout the year is on what I call subsequent commitments. So when people go to an auto dealer and buy a new car, they usually trade the older vehicle, and that's all through the year. My office sends out, as soon as I receive the computer files from the State Registry of Motor Vehicles, bills to folks that have purchased a new car, and all the data comes from the Registry of Motor Vehicles. So this expands a little bit on what Darlene mentioned in her presentation. So just this May, we saw even though the commitments have held up pretty well for this fiscal year, for all of fiscal year 20 to date, what we've seen is our tax, the number of tax bills that we're told to collect has decreased our total commitments by just about 1.5%. So for this fiscal year, it's not a big problem. What we did see this month is, and this is what Darlene referenced, the May commitment that we received was only for just under 132,000. That's a decrease of 60% from the year before. Not surprising, given that, most people are, hunkered down at home for safety. Some auto dealers are allowing you to purchase cars online or by appointment, but I would say the vast majority of folks are not out there looking at you at new cars right now. So, it's expected, but I just wanted to explain. So what this does, though, is it sets us up for the new fiscal year, kind of gives us a concern, because if folks are not out right now buying cars, we don't know how long the virus is going to continue, and business will be operating on a decreased level. If this drags into the summer and early fall, this is going to impact the tax revenue for the coming year in fiscal year 21. So that's just to give you an overview of motor vehicle excise tax.
Okay, if there are no questions for John, we can go to the next slide, the concluding slide on the revenue piece, which on page 23. And as you can see, here's the summary of what we just presented. Again, property tax decline 100,000, state aid 3.7, available funds 83,000, and local receipts 1.9, for roughly $5.8 million decline, or 4%. And as I mentioned earlier, if this were to be the case, the fiscal year 21 budget would be $3 million less than the budget that we're finishing up next month, or 2.15% budget decrease. And I guess to mention your question earlier, Virginia, about the property tax, this assumes no stimulus aid or other aid from the federal government or through the state in terms of relief to municipalities. As we know, there's a bill that's been passed by the House of Representatives in Washington that would provide assistance, but it's unclear what will happen and if that would happen. But I guess what I'm suggesting is this assumes no external aid. We could spend all night and tomorrow debating, will Washington give money to the states to come to the towns? Will the state be able to even apportion a portion of its rainy day funds to assist communities and so forth? Or would the Chapter 70 number be less? I mean, there's a variety of debates in terms of education aid from the state. I guess what I would say is, when reality does occur at some point, then perhaps the unexpected windfall could be used to go below the tax levy. And so I think, again, I'm taking a rather conservative approach by not projecting, someone's going to come in on a white horse and save us. But in the event, and this is what's peculiar, the 2008-2009 recession didn't happen in an election cycle. And never underestimate the impact of an election cycle. Here, it's the perfect storm of not only the unprecedented nature of a pandemic, but we're going into an election cycle. Obviously November for the state and federal elections, but you even got a primary at the state in September. So who knows what may happen. So again, I guess what I'm saying is I'm erring on the side of caution and not, but I think there is a chance, and there could be, that they might be able to go below levy if relief were to come in. Then on the other hand, one could argue, well, what if things really go south? Again, if there's a resurgence of the pandemic, then these may not even be enough cuts. That's the uncertainty. And I think that's why everything is sort of vague in terms of the federal level, in terms of what may come back, because they don't know if they can help states, but also help the economy and also help voters and citizens directly. And again, at the state level, the same thing. So again, that's where we are on the revenue approach. Yes.
Excuse me, when you say this scenario would result in a $3 million decrease to the budget, is
Mhm.
that 3 million below fiscal 20 or 3 million below what you had originally proposed for 21?
No, it's below 3 million
Below
below.
20?
Yeah, as you can see, the original
you.
budget there was 138. Really it's 139, and you can see the original budget was 142.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Yeah.
136.
Right.
So there's the 3 million. All right, so if there's no question on the revenues part, I'll sort of explain how do we attack this deficit of 5.8 million. And that's sort of the next slide on page 24. Again, the guidance or the theme or the philosophy is, again, recognize that this is a multi-year problem. We want to preserve town services, i.e. the quality of life in the town. We want to avoid reductions in the town's limited personnel. And I use the town there meaning, town, school, government personnel. I think it's time to draw upon the town's 11.36 million stabilization fund, the rainy day fund. It's certainly raining. In fact, it's pouring. And if we're not going to draw upon the stabilization fund now, then we never draw upon it, because again, this is something that hasn't occurred in 100 years. And I don't think in terms of the impact of a pandemic, and this is something in terms of an economic shutdown that, again, hasn't occurred in any of our lifetimes. We also look to identify what are other possible available sources of revenue and expenditure savings. And also, I'm going to ask John, following a few slides, to explain basically a 2/3 reduction in the proposed capital plan that was presented in January. So going to slide 25, here's sort of the first step. You got $5.8 million deficit. The proposal is to take $2 million out of the $11.3 million stabilization fund and apply it to the fiscal year 21 operating budget. So that brings your remaining deficit down to 3.8 million. So now where we go, before we get into the departments, what else can we do? Well, first one is proposing is that we would reduce our funding towards our other post-employment benefits unfunded liability from 1.5 million down to $1 million. Obviously, that's going to create a hardship for those who come after us in terms of citizens and such, in terms of the schedule we had to address that. But again, this is an unprecedented time. The next one is the health insurance credit of $500,000, which would basically be about a half month of premiums for the town. And the reason for that is many of you may have seen, there are no elective surgeries taking place for the past couple of months. It's just a situation where the expenditures by the health plans are not taking place, much like we saw with the auto insurance. They weren't having car accidents, so they're rebating premiums. And you're seeing it with dental plans as well. There's no dental claims because you couldn't go to the dentist. And on the health side, really the only thing that was going into the hospital was COVID. And you may recall they were pleading with people that it was okay to go to the emergency room. So again, what I'm anticipating is that we will have a health insurance credit and what would take place in the form of what we call a health insurance premium holiday. And you say, well, why is that? Well, if you recall, for active employees, the town contributes 75% of the premium, but the employees pay 25%. So therefore, anytime a credit comes, it really needs to be shared with the people who pay that expense. And even among the employees, you have people on an individual plan and some on a family plan. So the idea of doing a premium holiday, meaning the paychecks, in our case, it's a 2-week paycheck. There would be a paycheck where the accounting office would not take any withholdings from the health insurance for the active employees. And what that would do, obviously, is it would provide them with a few $100s and such in their paycheck that week. And in that way, we absorb that. But again, if our health insurance budget's around $11 million, 500,000 appears to be a reasonable projection. The other one we looked at, again, looking in all areas, is the amount that the town has set aside for abatements to the property tax. And again, that's a multi-fiscal year account. And the best information we have from the chief assessor and working with Darlene, our town accountant, is we can reduce the amount of money we need to put in fiscal 21 by $350,000 because there's still a sufficient balance from prior years that carries forward. And then the last one is, as I mentioned earlier, we can reduce our debt service, which is the non-excluded debt service, obviously, by the fact that if we're reducing our capital budget, then obviously the debt service payment would be declined by $100,000. So that again takes the 3.8 million deficit down to 2.34 million. And if you go to the next slide, it's General Stabilization Fund. And I'll ask John. John, you want to just talk about the Stabilization Fund in general?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Manager. Just to give everyone a history, just a quick update of where we are. We began the fiscal year with a balance that you see just 11,077,678. Our current balance is 11,364,603. Just to pause for a moment, we, as everyone knows in the financial markets, we had a really rough February and March. The good news is that in April, it bounced back. Now, that's not to say that if we have tough times ahead, if we all pray we won't have a resurgence of the virus, the markets could become spooked again, could go down. Nothing's for certain, but the good news is that we're still up from where we began the fiscal year. If you deduct the proposed withdrawal that was on the previous slides at $2 million, we'll be left with a balance of $9,364,000, and that's assuming that we don't earn any more interest or investment earnings for the rest of the year. So our plan going forward, being cognizant of the fact that we're proposing to withdraw $2 million, is that we expect to have free cash at the end of fiscal year 20, and so the plan would be going to fall town meeting this coming October. We would seek to use any free cash that's certified to try to partially replenish this withdrawal. So that's pretty much the plan. You can see, in my opinion, using the $2 million still leaves a healthy balance of $9.3 million, with the understanding that we would try to replenish.
Do you have any ballpark or order of magnitude guess as to what that free cash might look like?
At this point, it's really early. Darlene has to close out a number. Yeah, it's really, there's a lot of balls in place, so to speak. When Darlene closes her books, we'll have a little better idea. As she indicated earlier, we don't think it's going to be over $1 million. It's most likely going to be under $1 million, but we think we'll definitely be positive.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, John. If we now go to the next slide in terms of slide page 27, in terms of, again, how do we protect remaining deficit? This slide just sort of shows the departmental budgets of the town. On the general government side, you can see the list there. And again, as I mentioned earlier, on the general government side, the money is in public safety and public works. Of the 31 million, 22 million is in public safety and public works. So when people say, well, why do you always cut public safety and public works? Well, that's where the money goes. And then in the schools, it's a $63 million was the original proposed budget. And so if you look at it, roughly the public schools are 2/3 of departmental expenditures, and then the remaining departments of the town are roughly 1/3 of the budget. Again, so you've got 95 million out of 141 departmental in that thing. So if you go to the next slide on page 28, this is the proposal for consideration is the Chelmsford Public Schools. The original budget appropriation was $63 million, and the budget I released in January. The revised budget is just over $1.3 million less. And so that reduction would be a 2.12% change. And then on the general government side, you can see there's $1 million reduction of roughly 3.2%. So again, roughly the reduction is about 2.5% from on departmental expenditures from where we were when the budget was proposed in January. If you can see, it's obviously not proportionate because it's just not how you budget. You've got to examine and have priorities and so forth. And so that's what I propose at this point. If you go to the next slide, there are also considerations beyond this that remain. We still have unresolved contracts. We have memorandums of agreement with the clerical and the firefighters union. Those are expected to be brought to the Board of Selectmen on June 1st at their meeting for approval. We've continued to reach out to the superior officers and the public safety dispatchers, but at this point in time, we do not have any resolution to those. So again, that factors into the equation. For example, the firefighters memorandum of agreement, the preliminary calculation from the accounting office is, that's roughly a $300,000 budgetary impact. It's our second largest union in town on the general government side of over 55 firefighters in that contract. And remember, with this numbers, I'm talking fiscal 21, we have to do a retro for the first 10 months of this year. So when you're doing the calculation for 21, you've got to calculate the increase in the current year's budget and then another increase in the upcoming year budget. So that's why you get an order of number of that magnitude. So that's how that's the approach we have at this point in time in terms of how to assign the deficit. Where it would go from here, we would, the school committee would meet with the superintendent, identify the funding level, and then the school committee and the Neshoba School Committee is still not presented to the Finance Committee. And so obviously that would have to take place. And then I, as manager, would present the departmentals on the general government side to all the departments on the general government side to the Finance Committee. Because again, we're a month away from town meeting. There's a lot that has to transpire in terms of meetings and analysis and reports and so forth. And so that's the plan at this point. As a component of that is the capital budget, but we can stop here and then we can, if there's questions and comments, and then we can dive into the proposal to the town's capital budget.
Were there any questions?
I just wonder what the legal, we haven't touched what our legal fees have been.
We're not over budget on legal, George, and we're not proposing to change that budget for the upcoming fiscal year.
Okay, which is approximately what, Paul? I'm sorry.
That budget hasn't changed in years, and I think it's $190,000. I have it right in front of me. Give me a moment, but I believe it's $190 for legal.
Thank you.
Paul, do you have this is Eric, do you have either now or subsequent to this session, do you have provide the detail behind that 2.3 million in reduction as opposed to just showing town government versus schools? I'm assuming there's a lot of detail behind that.
Well, I don't know the detail on the school side. That's left to the school committee because, as you know, that the town just votes the schools a lump sum amount. As I said, I did meet with the superintendent along with the finance director, town accountant, and assistant town manager McCall. Dr. Lang felt that that's the number that they could observe that wouldn't devastate core educational services, and perhaps Jay can speak to that now, comment on that if you'd like to at this moment. And before I leave, the legal budget is $195. I just was able to confirm that. Hello, Jay, do you have any comments on that funding reduction?
No, I mean, at this point in time, just procedurally, the school committee had gone through the budget I'd recommended to them towards the end of January, early February. And it was right about the time that we ended up going out to school or out of school that we were set to go before the Finance Committee. So we actually have not gone before Finance yet. We did have our meeting with our subcommittee members, which went well, I thought. So we'll be looking forward to getting in front of the full committee at some point over the next number of weeks. But no, when I met with Paul and his team on Friday, I certainly understand the situation the town as a whole is in. What I will have to do is now go back through our budget and work with the school committee, kind of craft what those reductions might be and try to figure out how we will finance this lesser budget. I don't have a crystal ball, like I don't think any of us do, with regard to what is going to be the final number on state aid this year. The 20% reduction across the board, I think, there's some merit to that based on what did happen during 2008, 2009. I witnessed similar figures in another community at that time. So I don't think it's out of the ballpark. I am hoping in the end that obviously local aid in general is not impacted that significantly. There has been some talk at the state. We're still trying to figure out with regard to the New Student Opportunities Act, which was really a big driver for Chapter 70. We're hearing that the legislature doesn't really want to cut too deeply into that because of the efforts that they made. But again, I think they're just starting to call through all the updated revenue projections at the state level, and we really don't know where that's going to end. We did express to Paul and the group that I'm in a particular bind at the school department budget-wise because of notification clauses in contracts that are tied to statute. And I really do not have a lot of flexibility after June 15th to make any reductions in personnel by statute. So if I don't give notice to staff that they're not returning for the following year by that date, that basically we own them, and we don't have the ability to look at those particular staff if we ever had to getting into the school year. So I obviously would like to be more conservative at this point, and hope for, optimistically, if the budget numbers come in better. On my end, it's always a little bit easier to add than it is to subtract once we lock into a staffing model and a program for the fall. So next steps from the schools are, in a nutshell, I totally understand why this is being recommended, and my next step will be to just go back with the school committee and over our next couple of meetings, make some recommendations to them as to how to accomplish this with really not impacting to the greatest extent our direct services.
And I would add on the school side, we don't know what the rules are going back. We don't know in terms of classroom occupancy, in terms of pacing, whether it be online, who knows? And that may bring costs in and of itself. Right. So again, we know that there's bad news ahead of us. We just don't know clarity what that is. And also, just to mention, in case it's come up for consideration, well, what about Neshoba Tech? Why haven't we thought about reducing the Neshoba Tech budget? The problem with the tech budget is we don't have direct control over that. That's a budget that's voted by a majority of the 9 communities, which we're probably one of the stronger communities. That is just like a black box at this point. We have no idea what the impact will be to Neshoba, and then and again, we're only 30% of the assessment, and so again, any reduction in the Neshoba's budget overall, we only get less than a third back to our community. So if there were to be a reduction to the Neshoba budget, either by their loss of state aid or what have you, again, it's not going to materially impact the town's budget. It's 3.4 million. Again, you can just you could be in the talk of a couple 100,000 or so if they're impacted. We just don't know. But again, it's not dollar for dollar, and it's really outside of our control. I think the simple thing right now is leave it as is, and then as it unfolds, something will unfold. But we don't know what that is at this point in time.
Paul, Jim, on the governmental side, you mentioned that you have the kind of breakdown. Have you met with the department heads yet on those reductions, or?
What I have done is I shared with them this presentation earlier this week. I also, when it went out to you, to the 3 boards, I also requested that they submit 5% reductions to their individual budgets, because again, it's not going to be a uniform reduction across town departments, and those are coming in. The issues are just as it was. I mean, there were departments, and again, not to signal anybody out, but I'll signal out Darlene in terms of the accounting office. She says, Paul, I just, it isn't anything. When you look at Darlene's budget, it's her 4 personnel, and it's the audit expense. I mean, that's essentially what she does. So you can't go in there and say, well, I need 5% of your budget, and similarly across. where I anticipate happening is if you look at, if Jim, you may have saw this when we were presenting the budget, some areas that were of concern, we're looking at again in terms of what would be impacted. You're probably looking at overtime budget, right?
Yeah.
And overtime budgets fall under public safety and public works. Also, we're looking at snow and ice. Okay, we've had 2 good winters of snow and ice. You saw earlier, Darlene said we returned $600,000 this year in snow and ice. In the previous year, we earned $500,000. Now, of course, the odds would tell you it's probably not going to happen in this upcoming year. But I think what we would propose is reducing the snow and ice budget, because again, you'd hate to be laying off teachers and employees and others, and then having a mild winter. So what we do is I would see a reduction in the snow and ice budget, and then obviously having the reserve fund remain intact. So in the event that your budgets are even tighter, whether it's snow and ice or other expenses, then that becomes your backfill. So I'm not proposing a reduction in the reserve fund, but I think you would see a reduction in snow and ice, reduction in overtime budgets, and then again just going with core operations and activities. I think that's what you'll see.
Okay, thank you.
Probably what's an odd question, but on the school budget, what happens with your bus contract? I mean, do you have to pay is there some sort of clause in there that allows you to reduce the payment? Because obviously the students aren't being bused anyplace. So, I mean, are there some, I'm not saying these are significant, but are there some reductions of costs because of these strange circumstances? I mean, are the utilities in the buildings going down because the electricity use isn't there? I'm just curious about some sort of reduction in expenses based on what's happening.
Yeah. Am I on?
Yes.
Sorry about that. That is certainly going to be one of the areas that we're going to look at as a possible offset to try to help close some of that $1.3 million gap. When we do have contracts in place with our transportation providers, we stopped service on Friday, March 13th because that was our last day of schooling. And we do have language within the contract that requires payment only if they provide service. So we are going to be accruing some savings in that, and so that'll certainly be a piece that I will look to. As Paul mentioned earlier too, I think part of the difficulty that we're going to have is we'll certainly have a balanced budget to start the school year, but it is highly conceivable once the school year gets started that it's actually going to cost us more money as opposed to less money. Because of the different constraints that are going to be put on us around facility preparedness, daily cleaning and upkeep, any kind of specialized sanitation, dividers or barriers, or how the school day is going to look, whether it's in person, remote, a combination of both. But to your first question, Kathy, yes, that'll certainly be an area that we're examining. We are going to be projecting what that savings will be for this year. And then obviously we're fully budgeted for next year's transportation. But again, if we ever got in this kind of a situation and we weren't having to run buses, then we would also be accruing savings at that point. I forget the second piece that you asked about.
Just, I was asking about utilities, like the electricity in the building and the heat. I don't know.
Yeah, we haven't seen really too much savings on that front because this all occurred basically after the heating season. I think we would have seen the savings if this had happened during the winter. But by the time we left school, it was the middle of March. We were kind of at the end of the heating season at that point. I will, obviously be looking to do our year-end review. There may be minimal savings on the electrical front, but most of our lighting at this point anyway is all emotion sensitive, so it would only be on if there were actually people in the spaces. We have had staff still in the buildings. Our custodial staff was still in the buildings doing work and cleaning. So it's not like the buildings were totally shut down, but there may be a little bit of savings there. I don't think that'll be hugely significant though on the electrical side.
Thanks.
Okay, if there's no further questions at this time, again, we come back at the end, but I'll ask John Souza to go through the pared back significantly capital plan proposal.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. We took a hard look at the capital plan, once again, just really driven by two factors. The first is, being mindful of the economic environment that we discussed earlier tonight. And the second really is one of procurement. In talking with our facilities director, public works director, many of the projects that are performed in the schools are performed during the summer months. So if you think on our usual town meeting schedule, it would have happened had we not had the pandemic. Town meeting would have approved the borrowing authorization in late April. And then immediately after that, I began working on the process of issuing the bonds. And in the facilities department in public works, they begin their procurement process because a lot of these jobs are in public buildings and they're usually larger dollar amounts. So there's a whole procurement process for bidding documents, bid specs. And so that they use that time so that they can hit the ground running as soon as school is finished for the school year in late June. The facilities team needs to hit the ground running and make good use of time in July and August. If you think this year, unfortunately, the schedule's been pushed back. Town meeting won't consider this plan until basically late June. And then just in a week or two, we will already be into July. So in talking with Gary and Kathleen and their teams, it's highly unlikely that these projects would be able to be accomplished during the summer. So when we took a hard look at them, we really tried to limit the projects to those with what we considered the highest priority, those that focus on public safety, security measures, in a couple instances, things that are continuations that will allow projects that were previously started to be continued or brought to a conclusion. And just going through this slide, all of the projects that are still be funded going forward, you'll see in the far right column under May 2020. Anything that's basically been, as part of the revision, deferred to the future or not funded is shown lined out. You can see as you move down, the projects that we'll be moving forward with will be, security cameras in the IT department, vault storage upgrade that will bring one of those projects to conclusion, the senior center kitchen, a library computer replacement that's really sorely needed due to the age of the computers that they have. As we heard from both Public Safety Chief Spinney and Chief Ryan, that this public safety radio repeater upgrade is really critical because of the current equipment we have is very near the end of its life and would not be supported going forward. That's in the mobile radio system for the fire department for the same reason. If we go to the next slide, slide 31. The next project for funding would be the GIS flyover. What we're able to do there, as you recall, is the total cost of that's $150,000. It was split three ways between $50,000 for the general fund, $50,000 for sewer enterprise, and $50,000 for stormwater enterprise. With the data we have being so old, that's really critical. When you think of today's technology, so much of what we do depends on accurate GIS data. That's the reason for going forward with that. Project, the next one down is a continuation. This will allow kitchen upgrades that were started in at the Byam School, Harrington School, and South Row. We heard Dr. Lang had made a presentation to the Finance Committee discussing why this was needed. Several of the bids had come in over budget due to rising costs. And then finally, the last project on the list, although it's a larger ticket item, this is for security and surveillance upgrades at the high school. And as Dr. Lang explained, this is this is critical to try to upgrade this at Chelmsford High School. So you can see that the total revised plan is reduced $2.45 million to $1.35 million. and the amount borrowed decreases to 1.349 million. And so, as the town manager explained earlier, we thought this revised plan will allow us to still move forward with some of the more critical projects, but this is going to assist us in this economic crisis by us being able to drastically reduce the amount that we need to borrow for fiscal year 21. If there's any questions, I'd be glad to try to answer those.
I have a question, John. I was wondering if there's anything we need to do with that Parker kitchen in order for it to be compliant with the codes.
Those are code compliance upgrades. The reason we focused on the other ones is that the projects had already been started in those other kitchens. So I think, definitely, I know this is part of a plan. The capital plan originally had a bunch, a lot of kitchen upgrades and code compliance upgrades. And I know you're trying to move through the schools one by one to bring them up.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that they were, safe to use and that we weren't, in serious violation of anything that would put our food preparation and service in jeopardy.
You're looking at line 15, Donna? You're muted.
Can I jump in for a second?
Yes, I was looking at line 15, sorry.
Yeah, I'll go back and have a conversation with John and Paul after. I missed that particular line when I saw this packet come out the other day. The Parker kitchen in the code compliance we had decided to do as a large project. We had the Parker kitchen on last year, and we ended up bumping it out a year, so that it was scheduled to be done in 21. There was a number of kind of health and safety sanitary things that had been flagged by the Board of Health, and that was listed as a separate line for code compliance. So let me go back and actually have a follow-up conversation on this one, because the kitchen upgrade itself can be pushed off, but for relatively shorter money, I wouldn't want to be in a position, if we did reopen up again, of having had those citations and then not acted on them. So yeah, Donna, let me have some follow-up talk after this. I missed that on the list when I saw this.
Great, thank you.
Item 13, I agree with John. This was actually the remaining funding for a project we started a year ago. So the bulk of the work was funded in fiscal 20. When the projects went out to bid, they came in higher than we anticipated. So this is basically the shortfall that's necessary to finish those projects. So these are obviously projects we want to finalize at this point, and we have a partial appropriation. So the only one I'd be concerned with is 15, but let me have a follow-up after this before town meeting.
Okay, if there's no other questions regarding capital, I can quickly touch upon the other financial warrant article. As town moderator John Curlin mentioned earlier, the hope and effort will be to get the town meeting done in one evening. That may be attainable. There's 27 articles, but a third of those, or 9 of them, would be done on a consent agenda. And as we go through this list, I'll tell you that the consent agenda is generally annual articles that really don't engender debate, and they're just annual renewals. And so I'll touch upon them as we go through. But I've listed the financial articles. Obviously, we've been talking about Article 2, Article 2 is Darlene's discussion regarding the current fiscal year operating budget adjustments. Article 3 would be collective bargaining agreements. I touched upon that in my presentation. Article 4, again, would be the Neshoba assessment. Article 5 and 6 are the schools and the general government operating budgets. Article 7 is a citizen petition to appropriate $50,000 from the tax levy for air quality studies. That was one of those items that was on the next Finance Committee meeting agenda when the COVID shut everything down. So I imagine, that this gentleman would come in and present to the Finance Committee and the Board of Selectmen at the next meeting. Article 8, as I mentioned earlier, is the Finance Committee Reserve Fund. I mentioned in earlier discussions, I proposed to keep that unchanged at the $400,000 because we're certainly you see a situation where you got to draw upon that fund, perhaps more than exhausted if things don't break right. Article 9 is the capital budget we touched upon. Article 10 is the additional costs for the construction of the South Row School partial roof replacement. Where that stands today is basically the roof work is largely done except for the skylights and some other rain guards and so forth. That's the additional cost as a result of the detailed bidding and also, MSBA compliance and so forth. And again, we'll get 50% reimbursement on that amount. If you go to the next slide on page 33, Sewer Enterprise Fund, again, that's a standalone budget for sewer revenues. That it remains unchanged from where we were at $3.9 million back in January. The Milan Avenue Sewer Pump Station, you may recall at previous town meeting, we funded the design to replace that sewer pump station. This is a $350,000 project that would be borrowed, but the debt service for the borrowing would come from the Sewer Enterprise Fund operating budget. Article 14 is Stormwater Management Enterprise Fund. As I mentioned earlier, service budget now at $1.3 million. Article 15, the Forum Ice Rink Enterprise Fund. Again, that's $100,000 annual from this company that runs the rink. Article 16, the chiller refrigeration system, that would be withdrawn, no action. Again, it's something we've done some repairs to. We just don't think that's something that we need to take on at this time. Article 17 is the PEG access, the $600,000 to run Chelmsford Telemedia. Again, we look at the monthly revenue reports from Verizon and Comcast that pays for those operations, and those seem to be solid. So again, budget's the level service budget. Article 18, the Chelmsford Telemedia computer servers, that's a $20,000 expenditure for new server space. Article 19, again, the annual renewal of $30,000, a consent agenda item for the golf course enterprise. Same thing, departmental revolving funds, it's a procedural vote that's unchanged. There's no appropriation of money. It's just the authorization of the accounts where money goes in for services such as the seal of weights and measures and the fees paid for the inspections. Go to the next slide on Article 21. Cemetery Improvement Development Fund, that's the traditional $50,000, another consent agenda item for the continuous improvements to the main cemetery. Again, you've seen the work as you get on Riverneck Road, it's progressing at Fairview. Article 22, another consent agenda, $10,000 Community Action Program Fund. Article 23 is the Cranberry Bog tree removal and maintenance, and that's for the bog dam. That's a $25,000 request. And then Articles 24 and 25 are Community Preservation Fund articles, which again come from the restricted and dedicated Community Preservation Fund. Again, those monies are in hand. You've got $602,000 for the debt service and a $50,000 admin operation under Article 24. And then Article 25 is the preservation of historic vital records. That's a $400,000 project, again, that would be borrowed from the Community Preservation Fund, not from the general tax levy. So that's sort of, again, an overview of the town meeting warrant, where things stand in May as we approach Memorial Day into June. And then the only other thing I have, which is the next slide, is because of the unforeseen and significant sewer main break at the Southwell pumping station, we need to go to town meeting to fund the cost of that repair, which is over $710,000. Again, this doesn't come from the tax levy. It comes from the Sewer Enterprise Fund account, which again is in the Sewer Enterprise free cash or retained earnings from previous years. As you can see, we started the fiscal year at $1.9 million. We did pump station projects back at the fall town meeting last October. So the balance right now is $1.37 million, and we use half of that to pay the repairs, which would leave us with roughly $660,000 in free cash. And so again, when the selectmen were to meet on June 1st, we'd ask them to do this one article warrant to close this out in this fiscal year. So that really is the financial overview. The next slide would be the schedule going forward. And again, it just lays out dates. As you can see, we're here now before Memorial Day. What I would envision, going by the traditional schedules of the Finance Committee and Board of Selectmen, you have 3 Finance Committee meetings before town meeting and 2 meetings of the Board of Selectmen and Finance Committee. before town meeting, and then the town meeting taking place on the 22nd. And the FinCom report obviously would go out or so before town meeting. And I would not hold I don't envision holding a information session. What I would do is I would record an overview, working with John and so forth, to walk through the articles, and then that way people could watch that either on telemedia or on demand from their site in order to prepare themselves as they come into town meeting on the 22nd. And so I just have a concluding slide, and then I guess we can open up a general discussion. Again, the points I want to emphasize is that this is on slide 37. This is a multi-year economic challenge. Clearly, there's a lot of uncertainties, and again, not to get lost in the weeds, at the big level, clearly there's going to be a loss of revenue. Clearly, it's going to be a long duration, and it's unprecedented. And so again, things I want to reemphasize is there's going to be a significant impact during fiscal 22, a year from now, with the property tax levy because of the economic contraction and the year ahead. The other thing that happens, and we saw this with the recession back in the Great Recession in 2008, the level of support from the federal and state government tends to wane over time. And so we may get some stimulus or some assistance as we between now and November, but if we're sitting in these chairs a year from now, the history has shown us that level of support tends to wane over time. But also, you could still be and probably expected to be in some type of a recession where neither the federal government nor the state government can continue to provide support. Other things to point out: John sits on the Middlesex County Retirement Board Advisory Committee. They've just completed their 2-year actuarial study. The news was not good from that. This was prior to COVID-19. And John, why don't you want to just talk briefly about what's going on with Middlesex County at this point?
Yes, just to give everyone a quick overview, it's the situation. They just had their new actuarial valuation completed as of January 1st, 2020. And as you expect for a variety of reasons, the unfunded liability increased. At the same time, every retirement system has an assumed rate of return. And both the actuarial services person that's hired by Middlesex, as well as one that works for the state retirement board, the agency at the state called PARAC that oversees all retirement systems, are both recommending that because of the situation in the financial markets, the assumed rate of return be lowered once again from 7.5 to 7.3. Doesn't sound, say, well, it doesn't sound like much, 0.2%. But when you're talking about millions and millions of dollars, every time you lower the assumed rate of return, it causes the assessment to all the member towns to go up. So basically, we're looking at, for the foreseeable future, I would say into almost the end of this decade, increases around 6.5%. They have not released our exact Middlesex assessment for fiscal year 22 and 23. That will come in the future. And then Paul and I will have a little more visibility as to what our retirements, what we should budget for a retirement assessment for the next 2 years. But, and they also voted to extend out the funding schedule 2 more years from 2035 to 2037 to avoid spiking the assessment to all of the member communities.
Right. So as John noted, right, this year our assessment to Middlesex is $9.5 million. So if you're looking at 22, you could be looking at an increase of $650,000 in the assessment. So that's what I'm saying. We got to look at this in a multi-year period. And the next slide you can see is increasing solid waste disposal costs. We've just enacted a new contract with a tipping facility in Haverhill. That cost for solid waste at this point is going to increase by $200,000 in fiscal year 22, meaning the budget that's going to begin a year from this July. And again, all this support is uncertain and it's changing. And again, I would suggest that any positive variances be reserved for future use to address this multi-year problem. And the reason for that is, and it's sort of I don't mean to be yin and yanging back with my discussion about the property tax levy, but one of the reasons that we went to the levy also in 2008 and 9 is you want to avoid spikes in the property tax. So for example, and this goes to the idea of the waning support. So let's say we were to get $2 million in federal support this year, we lower the levy by $2 million. Well, all of a sudden, if that support isn't there in the subsequent fiscal year, you're then going to have that spike that goes to the $2 million that you didn't levy this year, plus the regular increase. So now you're going from a situation where, yeah, in the initial stages of a crisis, you provided less than a 2.5% increase, but yet in a subsequent year, when you could still be in a recession or slowly coming out, you could be hitting people with a 5+% increase just to maintain level services. And so that's sort of the cautionary tale of how do you move. But so anyway, that's the issue is, we don't know. And again, there's a lot of debate, but clearly we're at the beginning of a trip through the dark forest as opposed to the end. And so it's, again, what I'm presenting and what we're discussing here is a conservative approach in terms of how to address the situation. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the Finance Committee and School Committee and Board of Selectmen. That concludes the presentation this evening. Again, we're all here to answer any questions or discussion that you may have.
Does anybody have any questions?
I don't have any questions. I'd just like to offer my thanks to Paul and John and Darlene and all the employees who came up with a thoughtful, well-rounded approach. So thank you.
The other thing I'll comment is this, just to be aware, because I know Pat had asked this question, do we have to hold these meetings virtual? And the latest guidance we have from the state is for the foreseeable future, you still have to do virtual meetings. So, for example, if the Finance Committee wants to meet next Thursday, you still have to do this virtual. They will not allow you more than 10 people in a room.
Paul, but do you have the option where you could have, say, the Finance Committee holding the meeting, but on a Zoom camera where someone, you could have it on a larger screen where people could then log in?
I'm not sure I understand.
So you'd have the Finance Committee doing their meeting in Town Hall, but you'd have a camera there and set up a Zoom call for everybody else.
But they'd have to be seated 6 feet apart. I don't know how you do that in 205 unless you make it a big. I guess you could do it, but again, you would have no public at the meeting. You would just have a camera and then them spaced 6 feet apart. Maybe you do.
I think some of that too is how comfortable the members of every committee and board are even meeting in person. Their safety is important too, so.
Not only that, but logistically, where we have everyone come in, usually in the normal process and present their departmental budgets, we review those issues, we discuss those matters in our deeper dive into the budget. It's just not possible because of the social distancing requirements and the numbers would be there. So I just don't think it's feasible. But Paul, to your question for our schedule, looking at next week, May 28th, coming very soon, do you anticipate that the departments will be ready? I'm just trying to envision how we'll go through this process in a much accelerated nature.
Yeah. I can speak for myself. My intention would be to bring a budget to the Finance Committee that's balanced, that shows all the departmental expenditures by next Thursday. I would try to send it to you at least a day in advance. I would also send it simultaneously to the Board of Selectmen, and then the Selectmen could have that presentation following Monday, June 1st. And then that gives you the time to digest that and any questions that you may have, both boards, that on the 28th and the 1st. And then I imagine the Finance Committee probably also Tech and the Chelmsford Public Schools on the 28th. And then coming back at your next meeting and doing your votes. I also could present on all the warrant articles as well. And then again, if you need to bring in Jerry Hall for his article or others, you could do that virtually next week. But I think given the time frame and having sat with the committee for the years, you really need to have this next week so you can then receive a multi-hour presentations, come back following week, do your votes, and then take the time to get your report out. And as you know, we're a month away. You really need 3 weeks to do that.
Oh, no, I know. I'm aware.
So yeah, so the short answer to your question is yes. I will work tomorrow and through the weekend and into Tuesday and so forth, so that I can get issued in advance to your meeting the details on and I imagine the school committee and Dr. Lang may be able to give you their presentation next Thursday as well, but I can't speak for them.
Yeah, Dr. Jay, would you be able to do a presentation next week?
Yeah, I'm available. I would have no problem doing the presentation of our existing budget that the school committee had already approved. I won't be able to get back with them until Tuesday, June 2nd is our first meeting with the school committee, and that would be when we would likely make the recommended reductions to the budget. So I have no problem presenting the budget document as is. They've already approved that, but I wouldn't have an opportunity to get back to them with recommendations before the 28th.
Okay. All right. Well, we have to have maybe just schedule discussion offline and see if it makes more sense for you to maybe come in the week after, even though we potentially be voting that week. Just so we have an understanding. And I know it's not a line budget. It's a for us, our review. Although it discusses usually the parts of the budget, we don't have line autonomy, rather, budget line autonomy. And so we understand that we wouldn't be involved in that decision. We usually do discuss what goes behind that number.
Can I suggest this, Jim? If you wanted on the 28th, I'd be more than happy to come and review the existing document, because oftentimes, like you said, page to page, there might be different questions. And then I could come back on the 4th, very briefly at the beginning of the meeting, and basically just explain the adjustments that we would make to add up to the 1.3. We wouldn't have to go through the whole document again.
Why don't we do that?
I could do that if you'd like.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
No problem.
Any other questions? And with that, do we have
Motion to adjourn.
we have a motion? We have a second?
Second.
A motion, a second. All in favor?
Aye.
There we go. Aye. Great night, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
You too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Night.